In the 1970s and 1980s, America fell under the spell of a voice that sounded both powerful and fragile at the same time. That voice belonged to Linda Ronstadt, a woman who would win 11 Grammy Awards, sell tens of millions of records, and become one of the defining musical figures of her era. But behind the stage lights and timeless songs was a private life shaped by fear, loneliness, and difficult choices. Few people truly understood long before fame, controversy, or illness. Linda's story began far from Hollywood. In Tucson, Arizona, Linda Ronstadt was born on July 15, 1946, into a family where music was part of daily life. Her father, Gilbert Ronstadt, ran a machinery business, but music was his true passion. Late at night, he would sit with his guitar and sing traditional Mexican folk songs, with melodies filled with memory, discipline, and restraint. Young Linda listened quietly. She absorbed everything. The melodies, the lyrics, the emotion behind every note. Music wasn't taught to her, it surrounded her. By the age of 14, she had formed a small folk group with her siblings, performing in local cafes around Tucson. When Linda told her father she wanted to move to Los Angeles and become a professional singer, his reaction was not pride, but fear. Gilbert understood the music industry too well. He had seen young talent exploited, dreams crushed, and lives consumed by disappointment. He begged her to reconsider, warning her about the cruelty of that world. Linda didn't argue. She didn't rebel. She simply held her ground. In 1965, at just 18 years old, she dropped out of college. Gilbert realized he could no longer stop her. Instead, he chose to prepare her. He handed Linda his most precious possession, a Martin guitar. As he gave it to her, he said something that was both a blessing and a warning. "As long as you own this guitar, you will never starve." It wasn't a promise of wealth. It was a belief that music pursued honestly could sustain a life, but never without sacrifice. Linda left Tucson with that guitar, her voice, and $30 in her pocket. No contract, no connections, no safety net. Los Angeles greeted her with reality. Millions of people chasing the same fragile dream. She had no idea then that this decision would lead her to superstardom, or that it would also begin a lifetime of doubt, isolation, and fear that success could never erase. Los Angeles did not welcome Linda Ronstadt with opportunity. It welcomed her with overcrowded rooms, uncertainty, and quiet fear. A friend, Bobby Kimmel, allowed her to stay at his place. The house was small. The single bedroom was already occupied. There was no bed for Linda. At night, she laid herself out on the floor and slept beneath the dining table. Years later, she explained the choice with unsettling clarity. If she slept under something, no one would step on her. It was a small detail, but it revealed everything. The alertness, the vulnerability, the survival instinct of an 18-year-old girl alone in a city that could erase her without noticing. Hardship forced choices that had nothing to do with romance. Linda began sharing a bed with Malcolm, Bobby's roommate, not out of love, but necessity. There was no illusion about it. Music was the only thing that still felt real. Bobby Kimmel and guitarist Kenny Edwards were looking for a singer. When Linda opened her mouth and sang, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The voice was undeniable. From that moment, the Stone Ponies were born. They worked relentlessly. Within 15 months, 3 albums were released back to back, but success remained distant. In a vast folk rock landscape, the band was nearly invisible, until one song changed everything. Different Drum exploded on the radio stations, played it non-stop. Suddenly, the band's name was everywhere. Yet Linda sensed the danger immediately. This success could trap her in a role that wasn't truly hers. Instead of waiting, while still a member of the band, Linda quietly began recording solo material. Her debut album, Hand-Sewn, Homegrown, made history as the first alternative country album recorded by a female artist. It was bold, honest, and personal, but her second album, Silk Purse, left her conflicted. Though one song earned her first Grammy nomination, the recognition brought no joy. She was being praised for music she didn't love, with songs that felt shallow, lacking poetry, far removed from the music she had grown up with. The industry sent her material that felt empty. Later, Linda admitted she simply wasn't being offered great songs anymore. She believed older music, the kind her father played, was better structured, richer in meaning. When her father came to see her perform, she asked what he thought. He didn't flatter her. He didn't criticize her talent. He simply said the music wasn't for him. And that truth cut deeper than any bad review. Linda was rising toward fame while singing songs neither she nor the most important man in her life truly respected. That quiet conflict began eating away at her artistic spirit, even as the path forward seemed irreversible. Then, almost by accident, another turning point arrived. As Linda Ronstadt continued pushing forward, her career entered a strange in-between phase, and not yet superstardom but no longer obscurity. She was touring constantly, searching for better songs, better musicians, and a sound that felt honest. Around this time, her manager received a demo tape from a young drummer named Don Henley. But when she later heard him play Tuvit the Troubadour in Los Angeles, she recognized something more important than perfection: potential. Linda hired Henley for her touring band. Soon after, another familiar figure from the Los Angeles music scene joined the tour: guitarist Glenn Frey. Separate hotel rooms were a luxury no one could afford. Night after night, city after city, Henley and Frey shared the same cramped hotel room. Those rooms were hot, temporary, and uncomfortable. But inside them, something rare began to form. The two young musicians started writing together, trading ideas, testing melodies, sharpening lyrics. No audience, just ambition and instinct. It was there, far from the spotlight, that the foundation of egos quietly took shape. Eventually, Henley and Frey came to Linda with the truth. They were leaving to form a band of their own. Linda didn't try to stop them. She understood: step away and find your own voice. She supported their decision even though it meant losing two key members of her touring group. Few people realize that the origins of one of the greatest rock bands in history trace back to hotel rooms shared while touring with Linda Ronstadt. As Henley and Frey walked toward their future, Linda was approaching her own defining moment. In 1974, Heart Like a Wheel was released. The album was the result of years of frustration and struggle. Battles for creative control, for stronger songs, for production that reflected who she truly was. When it arrived, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The album shot straight to #1, You're No Good. And When Will I Be Loved dominated the charts, becoming the sound of an era. That year, Linda won the Grammy for Best Female Country Vocal Performance. She had officially entered the realm of superstardom, but behind the success, something was wrong. Night after night on stage, Linda carried a quiet terror no one could see. Her manager noticed it first. She would look out at the audience and imagine the worst, that they were whispering, judging, mocking her voice. Later, Linda admitted the truth. She had never believed she sang well enough. She avoided eye contact with the crowd. One of the greatest voices of her generation was haunted by relentless self-doubt. Inside her mind, a single question echoed endlessly: am I really good enough? Her solution was simple, almost fragile. Before every performance, she told herself 2 words: breathe, then sing. And so she did, pushing forward through fear, even as success grew larger than anything she had ever imagined. By the late 1970s, Linda Ronstadt had reached a level of success few artists ever touch. Her 1977 album Simple Dreams became one of the zooming records of the decade. Songs like Blue Bayou revealed a new depth in her voice, and controlled, emotional, unmistakably hers. The album didn't just succeed, it dominated. In an industry ruled by male rock stars, Linda stood alone at the top. At one point, Simple Dreams even knocked rumors from the #1 spot, something almost unthinkable at the time. By 1978, her album sales had surpassed 17 million. She had multiple platinum records. Time magazine called her one of the biggest individual rock stars in the world on stage. The image was overwhelming. Stadiums packed with 15,000, 20,000 people screaming her name. But the moment she walked off stage, everything collapsed into silence. Hotel rooms in unfamiliar cities, identical walls, room service trays. The crowds vanished instantly, leaving behind a loneliness that followed her everywhere. Years later, Linda would say that language itself has never invented a word powerful enough to describe the loneliness of life on tour. Her father's fears were becoming real. Every night she returned completely alone. Fame, instead of expanding her world, began to shrink it. When she wasn't touring, Linda retreated behind the gates of her home in Malibu. No parties, no premieres, no Hollywood social life. She avoided restaurants, disliked being watched while eating, and withdrew almost entirely from public spaces. Instead, she did something that surprised nearly everyone. She sat alone and knitted sweaters, not for fashion, not for publicity, for children she hoped to have one day. She later explained that it was difficult to find real wool sweaters for kids, and so she made them herself. The woman who commanded stadiums spent her evenings with yarn and needles, creating quiet, ordinary objects that had nothing to do with fame. It was the only way she could survive loneliness seeped into everything, especially love. Her first serious relationship was with John Boylan, a man who understood the music business deeply and eventually became her manager. At first, the bond felt perfect. Love and trust seemed aligned, but work invaded every moment. Phone calls interrupted dinners. Business discussions replaced intimacy. The line between partner and manager disappeared completely. She no longer knew what an executive. Eventually, the relationship ended, painfully, but without bitterness. They continued working together because, for Linda, music always came first. Another relationship followed with Jochen J.D. Suther, someone who understood touring, pressure, and creative life from the inside. They shared rare moments of calm, and the song Faithless Love grew directly from that connection. But the same forces returned. Understanding each other didn't save the relationship. It ended quietly with respect but no future. Slowly, Linda reached a realization that would follow her for the rest of her life. Love inside the music world is not ordinary love. Touring erodes bonds, fame distorts emotion, and some careers leave no room for permanence. After years of relationships shaped and broken by music, Linda Ronstadt met someone from a completely different world, Jerry Brown. They met quietly at a small restaurant in Hollywood. Jerry Brown was disciplined, structured, and intensely controlled. The opposite of Linda's chaotic, constantly moving life. After years of touring and instability, he offered something unfamiliar. As their relationship grew, Jerry's political career accelerated. Soon he became governor of California. Overnight, Linda was no longer just a rock star. She was standing beside one of the most powerful political figures in the United States. Cameras followed them everywhere. Every appearance was analyzed. Those close to them noticed something the public didn't. His sharp political exterior gave way to humor and warmth. The relationship was real, but the worlds they lived in were fundamentally incompatible. Linda's life was built on unpredictability. Tours, rehearsals, sudden travel, emotional swings. Jerry's life was planned years in advance, shaped by strategy, schedules, and public image. Jerry needed a partner who could fit into political life. Linda needed someone who understood why music always came first. Neither could become what the other truly needed. In 1979, they separated quietly, without scandal. Later, Linda said the relationship had been worth it. Some experiences matter even if they don't last. Other relationships followed. Actors, musicians, artists, all ended in time. Years later, Linda would say with characteristic honesty that she had absolutely no talent for marriage. She never married. Instead, in the early 1990s, Linda made a decision that reshaped her life more deeply than any romance ever had. She adopted 2 children. From that moment on, her world became smaller, quieter, and more complete. Music was still present, but motherhood became the center of everything. The reason to wake up, the reason to stay grounded yet beneath the calm. An old longing began to resurface, one tied to memory, identity, and her father's voice. Linda felt drawn back to the music she had grown up with. Mexican folk songs, simple rhythms, songs rooted in family and tradition. For her, it wasn't nostalgia, it was a return. For the music industry, it was unthinkable. Executives warned her relentlessly. No one wanted to hear that music. Too far from the image they had built, the queen of rock. They told her she was gambling millions of dollars. But Linda was no longer seduced by titles. What mattered was authenticity. Songs her father would respect, songs with poetry and soul. And once again she chose to move forward, despite criticism, doubt, and predictions of failure. In 1987, she took the boldest step of her career. She appeared on national television with a mariachi band. There was no safety net, no compromise, and then against every expectation it worked. The album didn't fail. It soared, more than 2 million copies sold. Linda had proven something the industry refused to believe, that audiences were still hungry for music with roots, memory, and truth. Just as she shattered those assumptions, another unexpected challenge appeared. In the early 1980s, just as Linda Ronstadt was redefining success on her own terms, she made another decision that stunned the industry. She agreed to star in a Broadway musical for a rock superstar. It made little sense. Rock concerts and musical theater lived in entirely different worlds. One relied on instinct and emotional release. The other demanded discipline, precision, and repetition night after night. Even Linda knew she was stepping into unfamiliar territory. When rehearsals began in Broadway, the shock was immediate. Around her were performers who had trained for musical theater their entire lives. They understood every rule, every rhythm. Later, she admitted that from the first day, everyone knew she had been thrown into deep water without a life jacket. She was terrified. Not the fear of crowds, that she had faced tens of thousands before. This was a different kind of fear, being exposed, unprepared, measured against professionals who spoke a language she was still learning. Once again, she relied on the same fragile solution that had carried her through decades of self-doubt. She took a breath and she sang against expectations. The production succeeded. It ran for nearly 2 years. Critical recognition followed. Linda had crossed yet another boundary, and now musical theater. From the outside, it seemed as though everything she touched eventually turned to gold. But the cost was accumulating. The loneliness never disappeared, the fear never softened. And slowly, something more alarming began to surface in the early 2000s. Linda noticed changes in her body that were impossible to ignore. Her voice, the instrument that had defined her entire life, no longer responded the way it once had. Notes slipped, control weakened. She tried to adjust, to compensate, convincing herself it was exhaustion. But deep down, she knew by 2009 the truth became undeniable. A slow-moving but relentless illness was taking hold. At first, she could still manage, but the progression didn't stop. Her voice continued to fade, and Linda could hear every imperfection long before audiences did. She refused to stand on stage and shout instead of sing. She refused to take people's money for something that no longer felt like music to her. In 2013, Linda Ronstadt made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the music world. She was stepping away from performing. At 66 years old, her singing career ended, not with a farewell tour, not with a final bow, but with quiet honesty. The voice that had carried her across 5 decades was falling silent. The music was still alive. Not on stage, not in her throat, but inside her mind. She could still hear every melody clearly, perfectly untouched. A composer trapped within a body that could no longer obey. And then Linda revealed a truth that reframed her entire career. She never liked performing, not eventually, not after burnout. The screaming crowds, the spotlight, none of it had ever brought joy. What she loved were small rooms, close friends, quiet sing-alongs. The studio felt safe. The stage was always something she forced herself to enter. 50 years of success built on fear. And in the most ironic way imaginable, the illness gave her something she had never allowed herself before: permission to stop. The disease did not arrive loudly. It moved slowly, patiently, taking things away one by one. Hearing became difficult. Balance required concentration. Walking was no longer instinctive. Even the movement of Linda Ronstadt's eyes began to betray her. The loss was gradual, but relentless. Yet inside her mind, something remained untouched. It was still there, clear, complete, and alive. The melodies played perfectly in her head, even as her body could no longer release them into the world. A lifetime of sound preserved in silence. Then Linda said something that reshaped the way many people understood her entire career. She admitted that she had never performed because she loved the stage. She performed because she loved the music. The crowds were never the reward. They were the obstacle she learned to endure. From small cafe face in Tucson to her final performance decades later, that fear never disappeared. She stepped onto stages not to be seen, but because the songs demanded to be sung. And when her voice could no longer meet that demand, she stepped away in a strange way. Parkinson's disease gave her relief. No more stages. No more forcing herself through terror before every show. The permission to stop was almost a gift, one she had never allowed herself to take voluntarily. The story circles back to 1965. An 18-year-old girl leaving home with $30 and a Martin guitar, a father's warning wrapped inside a blessing: you'll never starve. He was right. That guitar fed her in every sense. Not just financially. though her success was undeniable. Over a 5-decade career, Linda Ronstadt earned 11 Grammy Awards, an Emmy, multiple American Music Awards, induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and recognition from the Kennedy Center. She proved women could dominate rock music in an era that expected them to stand behind men. She brought Mexican folk music into the American mainstream. She conquered Broadway without formal training. But her father's fear had also come true. The cost was loneliness, identical hotel rooms, relationships worn down by distance, being recognized everywhere but deeply known by almost no one, evenings spent behind closed gates in Malibu, reading, knitting sweaters, searching for quiet in a life built on noise. Linda never married. Instead, she built a family on her own terms. She adopted 2 children, Mary Clementine and Carlos, and centered her life around them once the spotlight faded. Her world grew smaller, but it grew whole. Today, Linda lives quietly, far from stadiums and cameras. The voice that once defined an era is silent, but the music has never disappeared. It lives in recordings passed down like heirlooms and artists. She influenced, and in the private world of her own mimete, she traded stability for music, marriage for independence, comfort for authenticity, and loneliness for legacy. When asked whether it was worth it, Linda never offered long explanations. She simply said she had lived fully. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who hand us the tools to chase our dreams, even when they know those dreams will hurt us. Even when they can see the loneliness waiting at the end of the road. In 1965, Linda Ronstadt carried a guitar into Los Angeles. She never starved. And she changed music forever.